What is the cost of a bottleneck and a non-bottleneck activity? Cost of a bottleneck activity is a lost production of the entire system. Losing an hour at a bottleneck means that the system is not producing at its full capacity for the time lost at the bottleneck. The goal gives the example of the entire network having total operating time of 585 hours per month with a total expense for the month of $1.6 million. So losing 1 hour at a bottleneck would cost the company $2,735. Later, it is discussed that the bottleneck would only impact the goods that flow through the bottleneck. So if 80% of finished products pass through the bottleneck, then the true cost would be $2,188. As for the non-bottleneck activities, the cost is the excess inventory that is produced as a result of forcing an employee to continue producing to remain productive, but this creates added costs of inventory, not an increase in productivity. The book explains that this is in contradiction to the goal of the enterprise. How and why are these different? Bottleneck activities create a constraint in the system preventing throughput to be maximized, thus limiting the ability to meet existing or available sales demand. Non-bottleneck activities producing excess of what the bottleneck is able to process ultimately ends up in work-in-progress inventory and increases the cost to the system as opposed to increasing throughput. The book explains this difference by defining bottleneck activities and non-bottleneck activities as a bottleneck is any resource whose capacity is equal to or less than the demand placed upon it, and a non-bottleneck is any resource whose capacity is greater than the demand placed on it. The reason that they are different is that the bottleneck limits the throughput of the entire system, and any incremental improvement afforded by the bottleneck allows for matched incremental throughput. The opposite is true for non-bottleneck activities, where increasing production has no bearing on throughput and only places the excess production into work-in-progress inventory, thus increasing inventory.
So how do you estimate the cost of a bottleneck? The cost of a bottleneck is estimated by determining the operating expense for a specific period of time, measuring the total working hours in that same period, and then factoring the cost against the hours of any item that passes through the bottleneck. The book first estimated the cost of the bottleneck by determining the total operating cost for the month to be $1.6 million and the total working hours per month to be 585 hours, of which 80% of throughput passed through the bottleneck. As a result, the total cost of the bottleneck was $2,188 per hour.
Where should be the bottleneck or bottlenecks be located in a process? Ideally, the bottleneck would be at the beginning of a process. Most manufacturing processes have a specific order of how goods are produced, and it may not be feasible to place a bottleneck in front of non-bottleneck processes. If this is the case, then a firm would want the bottleneck to be pulling the process as opposed to non-bottleneck activities pushing production toward the bottleneck.
After assessing the assigned questions for a project, we wanted to understand the bottlenecks relating to our cookie manufacturing process. We used the process of making cookies initially from scratch to demonstrate the potential for bottlenecking. We identified that the process had one primary bottleneck when cooking one tray at a time, as the bottleneck being the oven or the baking component of the process. We could mix about 4 trays of dough in 19 minutes and cook one tray every 10 minutes. So we had the mixing measuring process producing about 13 trays per hour and the cooking process producing about 7 trays per hour. To solve the bottlenecking, we identified that we had 3 available trays that could be used at any given time and saw that the capacity of the oven was able to handle multiple trays. This allowed the production capacity of the oven to far exceed the capacity of the mixing measuring process. Once identified and implemented, we still had the measuring and mixing of ingredients taking approximately 19 minutes to produce the dough that resulted in approximately 4 trays of cookies, yielding about 13 trays per hour. The oven now had a capacity of 3 trays cooking at any given time, which yielded approximately 20 trays per hour, indicating that there was now a bottleneck in the mixing and measuring step of the cooking process. So we looked at how we could relieve the bottleneck in the cookie making process for the mixing and measuring component. Outsourcing the cookie dough became an easily identifiable solution to our bottlenecking problem. What we were able to determine in the outsourcing of the cookie dough was that the quality, taste, and appearance of the cookies was drastically different than the cookies produced entirely in-house. Our highly qualified and well-trained quality control and manufacturing team was able to see a distinct difference in the final product of goods manufactured in-house versus outsourced dough. This was largely due to the recipes and raw materials differences between in-house and outsourced dough. This led us back to reevaluating our decision to outsource and decided that it would be best to revisit the potential for increasing the output of the mixing and measuring process to see if there was a way to increase our batch sizes. Management expects feedback from operations in coming weeks. In the meantime, enjoy a cookie from our bakery.